A very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today. I am Meher Gandhi, and on behalf of Kalinga Literary Festival, I gladly welcome Rituparna Chatterjee and Amitav Kumar for a much awaited conversation. Amitav Kumar is a writer, a journalist, and a professor of English. His work called Immigrant Montana was honored among the notable books of the year by The New Yorker. It was also named as one of the best books of the year by The New Yorker. He is the author of A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, Passport Photos, Bombay, London, New York, and recently A Time Outside This Time, and many more. Thank you, sir, for spending this wonderful evening with us. We also welcome Rituparna Chatterjee. Rituparna Chatterjee is a journalist and a writer. She has been the US correspondent for the Economic Times. She is the author of The Water Phoenix, a memoir of childhood abuse, healing, and forgiveness, which she has described as a magic realism memoir of child abuse, healing, and forgiveness. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us today. We warmly welcome both the authors, and today Rituparna Chatterjee will be in conversation with author Amitav Kumar about Amitav Kumar's book, A Time Outside This Time. Thank you so much. I now invite Rituparna Chatterjee, author, to kindly take over the stage.
Thank you, Meher. Hi, Amitava, and thank you, Kalinga Literary Festival. So lovely to be here.
Thank you.
So, Amitav, I just wanted to begin with your novel, and we have the US edition here. A Time Outside This Time. We're discussing fake news through fiction in a way we can discover truth through fiction in a way we never can in any other medium. But I found it so ironic and hilarious that your protagonist is called Satya, meaning truth, and he's inspired by the news of Obama's daughter talking about Hemingway's famous sentence, which we all try to as writers, write the truest sentence, when he was like, oh, I'm going to write the most untrue story I can based on that. So I wanted to also come to one thing. We are a culture based on gossip. Fake news has always been there. One of my journalist friends, I think you know him, Deepal, he was saying the same thing, that there was always fake news. So we're only finding out about it now because there's an infodemic. Why this book now? And then tell us about your book.
Uh, Great to be here in conversation with you. First, I think we should tell the audience what you were talking about when you mentioned Hemingway.
Mhm.
So, what happened was that during the last days of President Obama's presidency, he had given an interview. Trump had already been elected, his inauguration had not taken place, and Obama told the interviewer that his daughter had been reading Hemingway's A Movable Feast. And as an aspiring documentary filmmaker, she was very much inspired by a line of Hemingway's which said, write the truest sentence you know. And my narrator, as you rightly pointed out, reads that and thinks, you know what? We are living in a time of fake news. I'm going to write down the one revealing lie every day. And so, with that background, your question is, fake news has been with us, or gossip or lies have been with us all the time. Why this book now? That's a good question. We have not experienced the manufacture of untruth on the either at the rate or the scale that it happens now because of social media. And it is that change that was a definite provocation in my mind, because I began thinking that if tweets lead to riots in this country, in the US, and if WhatsApp forwards lead to lynchings in India, then in the face of this fiction, what can our fiction do? What can novels do? What can stories do? And it is that particular challenge of this specific time that for me shaped my thoughts. And I began thinking of a journalist who wants to investigate the truth, sometimes revise the truth, and who also wants to, at sometimes, just write down the news so that it is not forgotten. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it describes the book perfectly. Would you like to read an excerpt from it?
Sure. The excerpt I'm going to read is from fairly early in the book. When I was a boy in my hometown, and it had been raining for 3 days, it became so that it was no longer possible to have any consciousness of a time when it wasn't raining. Rain soaked through the walls, and slime grew on the inside, in the corners, and even on the ceiling. Phones stopped working, no newspapers came, birds disappeared from the wet branches of trees. No question of going to school. There was no language outside of "it is raining outside." Water stood in the distant fields. It rushed down pipes and roared in the gutters. The roads became rivers in which people waded or swam. Brij Bihari brought his cows onto the veranda at the back of our house. Mother would switch on the fans in one room to try to dry the wet clothes. It was all in vain. The snake found in the toilet was proof that the world outside had changed and the natural order had been turned upside down. Only rain was permanent. You could do nothing but wait. I'm saying all this because that is exactly what has happened to us politically. We cannot imagine, I cannot imagine sometimes, a time outside this time. The people who are in power must also be deluded enough to believe this. They must think that their power is eternal, that they will sit on the throne forever. And it is this thought that is their failing, because it condemns them to missteps and error. Stay alert. You will hear the rain stop and the wind shift. The powerful will not be waiting for it, but that moment will come. It will mark the beginning of their doom, their end.
In chapter 3, you quote from the Talmud. We are not, and you say you're not sure where the quote is from. Is it from Kant? Is it from Talmud? And you say we do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And in today's infodemic, where news is consumer product and entertainment, it's like we're consuming it like namkeen. Uh, how do we discern what is fiction, what is news? How do we make sense of who we are in the middle of all this? And I think you end the book with your student, who learned more from at that bar than he did at college. So how do we make that discernment?
Yeah. Well, when we are talking about journalism, and when we are talking about the news that we receive on our, let's say, on our smartphones through WhatsApp forwards, let's say, as you must know, India is the largest producer
Yes.
of fake news on WhatsApp.
Yes.
So one way we have to, and I think policies and policy changes should reflect that, one way we must respond to this is by introducing measures that are basically fact checks. We should not be allowed to spread rumors that have been proved to be false. So that's one thing. But the very form of the novel, my idea, and this might be a self interested idea, but I really do believe in it, is that the novel, fiction in or long form writing, is the correct response or the correct antidote to the spread of these instant rumors that lead to murderous killings. Um, I think long engagement, I think what I call in my novel slow jamming the news is a good idea. Because let me also explain to your listeners, when Gandhi went to South Africa, he invested in a printing press. He was interested in spreading news. But his idea of spreading news was not just spreading propaganda or his truth. It was about slowing down the consumption of news. So, what he would do is that this idea of the global diasporic Indian was at the heart of his perception of what it meant to be a world citizen. And so there would be news from all over. But also, what was going on was that he would introduce bits of Tolstoy or Ruskin or Thoreau or the Buddha or pieces of the Bible in order to slow down the consumption of news. And what happens with WhatsApp forwards is that people quickly receive the news and they put it forward without there being any kind of contemplation of what it is. Is it true? It is false. Who said this? If largely, if it confirms our biases, people believe something is true. So that awareness itself and the consumption of news on a different scale, as for example from a novel, is for me the proper antidote to the instant spreading of fake news.
So when you mentioned long form, for slow jamming the news, must it be a novel? I know we'll come to autofiction a little later, but must it or can it be just, nonfiction as well?
Yes, yes, of course, of course, of course. Um, since we are discussing a novel, I mentioned the novel, but I really think that long form non-fiction, let's say in the Indian context, what the magazine Caravan is doing,
Yes.
is wonderful for me
Yes.
to think about as something that is a deep investigation, is fact checked, is not something that is easily digestible and spat out, in the public sphere. That is the writing I'm advocating. That is the kind of living I'm advocating. Even right now, for example, if someone is forming a judgment about you or is forming a judgment about what I'm saying, you have a right to make that judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But let it be an examined judgment. Let it be
Yes.
a contemplative exercise, is what I'm basically arguing for.
Right. And with social media, which is just constant regurgitation, I think we have lost that mind space. My husband is a huge fan of Christopher Hitchens. And I mean, it's just constant, such high quality analysis of news events. And we just gain so much. And I had to actually stop listening to Hitchens so I could write the way I do, because I felt my journalistic background interfered in my writing. Because and that's one thing I wanted to come to, that a lot of writers who come from a journalistic background, we find it very hard to write fiction because we are so obsessed with facts and truth. There's a bit of cadence to fiction, especially. It can also be in nonfiction, in memoir, especially. But you seem to have, like, when we read your work, you seem to have, I mean, it's magic, really, to have just turned journalism into fiction. It reads really well. Because every other journalist I know, a friend of mine went to Stanford, after years at Times of India, and she was told by the teacher, by the creative writing teacher, can you focus a little less on fact and imagine a little more? And she actually gave up. And it took me a lot of unlearning. I would say almost 6-7 years. And I have to. The only news I consume is, you mentioned Caravan, is Atlantic, because I cannot bear this endless stuff on Twitter, especially. And we live in circles where this is all we discuss, right? Journalists, writers, this happened, and this is my opinion. And even if it's slightly different from family WhatsApp forwards, which I don't even know where to begin on that. So how does this, I mean, all of your work seems to be based on observations. So I also noticed this in Immigrant Montana, which seemed to be an observation of your life from being a student. And, as readers, we also relate to having been an immigrant, been here, all of that. It's as if you're an observer, a journalist making a record, bearing witness. So which one are you? Are you a journalist? Are you a novelist? Are you an activist who feels these records must be kept?
I don't think the real distinction should be between whether a work is fiction or non-fiction. I don't think that's the most important distinction. The most important distinction should be whether it is a good writing or bad writing, in which the considerations are whether you're being honest, whether you're being clear, whether you're being reflective, whether you're being thoughtful, whether you are advancing understanding. So for me, Whether writing nonfiction or fiction, the idea is always how do I produce an experience for the reader that is an investigation into what it means to be alive today.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I'm a writer. If I was writing a book, let's say about my hometown, a nonfiction book, I was interested in asking myself, on one hand, how can I talk about the rats that carried away my mother's dentures? How can I talk about the rats which the police commissioner there says in Patna drank all the confiscated liquor? And I was interested in asking myself, how am I the rat who has left that sinking ship and abandoned my parents, and how I have moved away to a place of comfort? So, the investigation into how at once I can express my fidelity or faithfulness to my place of origin, and at once be also critical of the people and of the place, was important to me, and to shape a voice that was honest. Now, that same thing also exists when I'm doing fiction, where I'm asking myself questions like, um, if it is if it produces despair in my mind to see a video
Hmm.
of a black man being killed by the police in this country, and if that despair is equal to the despair I feel when I see a video that has gone viral in India of the lynching of a Muslim man suspected of eating or selling beef, then how do I, as an artist, respond to it? And how do I create a text that both presents that experience accurately and also makes us reflect about the consequences? So, those are the questions I'm struggling with. I do not ask whether other questions of whether I am a non-fiction writer or a fiction writer. I just want to be a good writer.
Right. And I wanted you to elaborate a little generally on this, upcoming form of autofiction, because your form of autofiction, and I wanted to go, I mean, it's very obvious in a time outside this time, which is around news, but I wanted you to just elaborate on autofiction as a genre, because there's Ocean Wong's autofiction on Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which is very different, which again is a Vietnamese American, you know, life here, but it's got a bit of magical realism. It's got all that folk stuff, that myths and stuff that all of us in the Eastern cultures grow with. So I think, I mean, the fact that both of your genres are autofiction, and yet these are, I'm just giving two very different examples. Um, and I think it's very interesting for me as a memoirist to see that. Can you tell us a little bit more about autofiction outside of news, just as a genre? You're also a teacher of creative writing, so um, you know.
I don't know what do your listeners know about autofiction, or I myself have never used that term for myself. Um, so, but I think what you're asking me is that do I use a form of writing that has some appears to have some autobiographical elements? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes, and it's still fiction. And I
Yes.
think these are things we don't think of these things when we write, uh, or create as artists, because, like Fellini said, even if I make a movie on a fish, it will be an autobiography. But publishers have created these genres, and a lot of our viewers tend to be budding writers. So, and you are also a teacher, so I wanted you to just shed light on autofiction as a genre, even though you don't consciously call it that. And I personally faced this trouble. I wanted it to be a novel so I could explore the psyche of the abusers, but publishers insisted that it be a memoir, each and every buddy the book went to. So, it's a I think we're coming to the publishing part of it rather than the writing part of it. But just if you could shed some light.
Yeah. There is a British writer, Jeff Dyer, who's a friend of mine, and his quote that I often repeat to people is that I write, I like writing an inch from life,
Mm,
but all the art is in that inch. Okay?
beautiful. Yeah.
So, in other words, I'm I'm ma- I'm taking a lot of I'm making a lot of effort to give my reader in that book or in another book like Immigrant Montana this sense that the narrator might be very close to who I am. It's an invention though, because so in Immigrant Montana, the narrator's or the protagonist's name is Kailash.
Yes.
But Kailash has an Irish colleague who calls him Kalashnikov. And from Kalashnikov, he calls him
Right.
AK 47 and AK. Now, AK happens to be my initials. Many people call me AK here. I thought I was being very clever, and you can disagree with that. But I was being clever in promoting this sort of conflation between two identities. Okay? But that is something I just dreamed up. It is something I invented. So that is where I identify what Jeff Dyer was calling that inch. You're doing this little maneuver as I'm doing in this latest novel. My narrator, when the book starts, is in Italy at a villa on a residency. And I happen to be myself on a writing residency in a place called Bellagio. Did all the things that happened to him happen to me? No.
Mhm.
Uh, did the pandemic arrive when I was there? No. But that is how I have presented in the novel. To me, to give you a very clear answer on this, to me, who has worked as a journalist, the voice of the reporter or the voice of the non-fiction writer is very close to my heart. It seems real to me. So I try to create a voice on the page that seems to be reportorial
Mm.
while inventing everything because that feels real to me. Do you understand that? It's an
Yes, yes.
invention of reality, basically.
Right, right. I think that puts it really clearly for a lot of us. And also, like I said, I think almost every journalist wants to be a writer at some point, and all of us, um, I'm speaking for a lot of people, have struggled with this. I think it's pretty amazing that you managed to make it. I think it's pretty unique. You not only make it work, but make the journalist's voice, into autofiction. That's pretty cool. That you're also a painter, and I do a little bit of watercolors myself, and I've noticed it really changes the way we write. How does this intersection of various arts, how does it affect your writing? Does it make you more observant, or does it? I mean, for me, it helps with, I don't know, a little surreal, a little magical realism, if you want to call it that. So how do watercolors affect painting? Just
Yeah, it's a
again,
recent
you're
thing.
observing. I follow your posts on Facebook. It's like all the little things you see, you're just painting them,
Yeah.
like small news pieces.
Well, Rituparna, for your viewers who are seeing me here, if they look on the screen above me, they can see a face. Can you see a face? Rituparna, can you see a face?
I
A
mean,
face
your face.
photograph above my head?
Oh, right behind you.
Yes, that
Zoom in.
that that photograph. Oh, sorry. Let me move the other way. That photograph is John Berger, a
Ah,
British
of course. Yeah.
British writer and critic named John Berger. And a couple, 3, 4 years ago, I was visiting the writer Michael Ondaatje in Canada, and Ondaatje gave me Bento's Sketchbook, which is a book of sketches by John Berger, who has been an important figure in my life. And for Berger, who won the Booker Prize for his novel G, the practice of drawing was a way of observing the world. As you rightly pointed out, that is what it helps you do. You are observing, you're noticing things by looking closely. It is a little bit akin to the practice I was advocating only a few minutes ago when I was talking about slow jamming the news. How to slow it down, the process through which you consume the news.
Mhm.
So, for example, one of the things I have in this latest novel is a painting I did of a man whose photograph I had seen. He's begging for his life, man being lynched in Jharkhand.
Mhm.
So I painted it. in painting it, I'm not a great painter. I'm not even certainly a trained painter, but in painting it, I'm noticing some things. I'm noticing, for example, the abandoned chappal. I'm noticing the trousers and the footwear of the people around me. Um, and when others see the picture, they become a bit more alert to what is happening in the picture too. And my words also slow it down, because my words serve as an long caption, as an extended caption that slows down the consumption of that image. So that's what painting is allowing me to do. It is allowing me, in some ways, to slow down my own consumption of the world. And I had been painting when the pandemic started. I started painting on the obituaries printed in the New York Times, and that was my one way of trying to respond creatively to what was rendering me quite clearly very passive, which is because that is what the news does to us. It
Yes.
renders us helpless. And to paint in that way, particularly on newsprint, was a way of finding a certain toehold in reality.
Right. And it's also, when you talk about slow jamming news, it's constant consumption, but it's just a reflection of a very go society. In the olden days, we sound so old in the olden days, but there was a lot of people watching. We could just sit at train stations or whatever. I find public places crowded to be a little less in America, because just, I guess, public transport, of course, is in New York City a little bit here and there, but mostly the isolation of just vast expanses, and you're just driving your car. So is people watching a substitute for painting when it comes to better observation? Are they the same thing?
No, because you could paint objects. You can paint this coffee mug that I got from the film class today. I could
Hmm.
sit and paint this. So it's not the same as people watching. And in fact, in my case, because I do not know how to draw figures, I have not been doing uh, painting. But I understand. I think what you're saying is, Rabindranath Tagore has a had a great essay about his experience as a student, how much he hated school, and why he preferred daydreaming. So daydreaming, by which he meant simply actually standing at the window or sitting at the window looking out,
Yes.
filled with aimless thoughts, he found a much more creative and human activity. So I think that's where your question is leading us, where we are not like rats in a maze, where our distractedness is not holding this object called the phone and doom scrolling, but instead becomes something that is almost contemplative, because it almost becomes a kind of a spiritual practice
Yes.
to be not yoked to a task, to be looking out of the window, to be watching people, as you say, or but also, maybe an ant crawling on a wall. Even that. And I would love, if for those of you who are in India, let me, where is my, you know, that you can see the
Mhm.
ants.
Right.
I painted that at the request of the designer of the book, because there is a chapter, as you know,
Yes.
in the book called My Experiment with Ants,
Yes.
where the boy is killing ants, and that is linked to, in his mind, what is happening or what people are doing to their neighbors in that city where a riot has broken out.
Right, and that's so powerful, because we are, there's a lot of psychology as well in the book, through Satya's wife, Vani, and also, just I think it's very powerful, and also difficult to deal with, the way all of this shapes the little boy, and he believes that these are Muslims, and he's worried about his driver, and
Yes.
his father not as invincible as he thought. Like, everything is shaped by, and it's very interesting, because what the boy is formed, everything is informed by life fake news, gossip, all of it kind of gets mixed up, even though his version of news is not coming from traditional media, newspapers, or whatever, WhatsApp even.
Yeah.
So and yet he has formed this, it's fascinating how I found that extremely powerful, since
Thank
you
you.
mentioned
Because you mentioned
so
the,
innocent.
yes, yes, the idea of the bruised innocence. If you think about violence, if you're portraying violence from the viewpoint of a child, it is a great gift for a writer to do that, because um, you enter a zone where you do not have authoritative explanations for what is happening. And so, what is meaningless and mind numbing about violence becomes clearer for the reader, because you're representing it from the viewpoint of a child who does not have explanations for violence. So, I felt I should start my investigations, my narrator's investigations, with the portrayal of a childhood and then come to the present, because that would allow me. One thing, since you mentioned psychology, yes, it is true that the narrator's wife is a behavioral psychologist. So she has explanations for why we do what we do.
Yes.
And that was for me a way of getting into a mindset that is slightly different from my narrator's. It was a foil in the narrative, because he is interested in truths that are a bit more, less generalizable, less predictable, or less, because he's interested in the human heart, in the human soul, which is a much more little bit more complicated than what scientific theories can do. Does
Right.
that make sense to you? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so she has even theories which I found interesting from my reading in psychology. If you're driving in India, in along a road that is a ghati or a valley, and you're climbing out of mountains, there will be road signs. For example, it will say, "Speed thrills but kills."
Yes.
Okay? And Vani, my narrator's wife, explains to him that scientific psychology tests have shown that if slogans are rhyming, people remember it later when they are tested on it. So I thought I should put those things down so in my book, so that the reader learns that some of our behavior and how we behave is the subject of scientific inquiry. And what my narrator is doing is its own form of inquiry. And there is some overlap, but also some difference.
And then the child's form of inquiry, which I think kind of becomes his identity. Um,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
And I was just reminded when you mentioned Tagore that when Tagore was 6 years old and he saw raindrops on leaves, those were his first lines. Jol pore pata nore, basically, the leaves move with the raindrops. So he was a very lonely child who was locked up in this room. So at age 6 was his first poem, and he also started painting, but very late in life.
Very late, at around 60 or 65.
Yes.
Okay, so how would you translate that line from Bengali that you just recited?
I'm not a translator. I think
Yes,
he
no problem, but still, just as a bit.
it rhymes again. Jol pore pata nore. And I can only speak Bangla. I cannot read or write it, but it basically means water falls, leaves move.
Ah, yes,
Literal translation.
yes, yes,
And it's so poignant because there's this lonely child and just locked up in a room and
yeah.
staring out.
I
Uh,
know you have interviewed Arunava. Let's call
yes,
him up right now and ask.
I know. And I was just going to say that's his. I'm always so grateful to him because I always grew up outside of Bengal, and translations just help so much.
No, no, he's doing that kind of work was very necessary in India, and he is one of the pioneers. There are many others too, but
Yes.
it's wonderful that that kind of work is going on in India. It's very exciting development in literature, frankly.
I also wanted, campus life features prominently in your work, and again, I guess that's part of autofiction. It's your life. Tell us a little bit about how teaching affects your writing process, your world building, or whatever it is.
Yes. Coming back again to that figure that you see above my head, John Berger,
Mm-hmm.
after he got the Booker Prize, he gave half the money to the people who were working in the Caribbean, in the plantations, because Booker's um, fortune had come from the slave plantations and he was paying it back.
I didn't know
The,
that. That's
yeah, and the other half he used to do a wonderful work on migrants, and it was called A Seventh Man. It was a collaboration with a photographer called Jean Moore, and it is every seventh man at the time the book was being written, was a migrant in Europe, and that was the idea. Now, I'm interested in the campus or in the campus novel also because a very important figure in the migrant global economy right now is the graduate student from
mm,
places like India who are brought here and
right.
who, for very little money,
Yes.
teach as teaching assistants.
Yes.
So, for me to write about the campus, for example, in Immigrant Montana, was a way of attending to the realities of that global labor force and to think about, one of the slogans of people of migrant protest has been they want our labor, not our lives. Why were Chinese laborers brought here to build railroads not allowed to have their wives here?
Yes.
Because it was the idea that we need only your labor, not your
Not
lives. Um, and certainly in telling our stories, telling the stories of migrants, telling the stories of migrant students, for example, I wanted to access if the economy wants or desires or exploits only their labor, I wanted to replace the idea of labor or substitute it with or supplement it with the story of their lives. So that is why I'm interested in it. Um, but to answer the second part of your question, how is teaching? Well, as you rightly noted a little while ago, the book ends with a conversation with a student of mine, and I was thinking at that moment of my narrator, some sort of asking himself, what has he learned from the youth? Because here we were in the moment of the last days of the pandemic when it was really raging in this country, and the Black Lives Matter protest erupted. Now, just before that, for months, we had seen in India, in Delhi, for example, at Shaheen Bagh, the protests against the unjust citizenship laws and the farmers' protests. In each of such protests, whether it is the Black Lives Matter or it is what was happening in India, there was a big role being played by the youth. So, my way of ending that story where it ends is a way of asking what, how can we understand what is it that the youth are dealing with and how are they responding to it? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Um, so, I don't want to give
Too much. Away.
away too much, but yes, but the book ends with the student asking my narrator, who is a professor at a college like the one that I'm sitting opposite here right now. He says to him that, we return to what we started in the book, the
Yes.
idea of writing the truest
Yes.
sentence. And the boy is writing down what he asked the teacher to write down something too. And that is a moment where the teacher then begins thinking, what has motivated his own writing or the book he has been working on, and he begins to write about a death of a man and how a lot of life is left in a man being killed.
Mm. Yes, it's very poignant.
Thank
Uh,
you.
and you know, lastly, you've written a book on craft. Every day I write the book,
Yes.
and
In
I
India, by the way, I should tell you, in India it was published as writing badly is easy, where the word badly is scratched out. So writing is easy, but writing badly is also easy. I was playing around a little bit.
yeah, that's like your AK.
Say,
Um,
say, say, say.
um, And you have, I wanted to actually ask you this. You've always said a writer should always carry a notebook.
Huh.
Um,
Yes, madam, 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 like this.
yes. Oh, so do I. I have the same one, but
Good, good.
but I also use voice notes on my phone a lot. Sometimes it's too fast and I
Yeah,
can't.
whatever works, no problem. Yeah.
Both. But what I wanted to ask you was that do you also carry a little sketchbook? Because
Ah, no. I have carried it on trips because on during travel one becomes more of an observer, and where I live, it's only when I'm made up my mind that I'm going and to I'll go out and draw that I take the sketchbook. Otherwise, I just have the notebook. But maybe one should. I don't know. Because first, I should tell everyone that I ask my students that they need not overburden themselves or overwhelm themselves with too many demands. They should carry a notebook and they should write 150 words. If I, you know, like this morning, I was in another class in film, and you take down notes, someone says something interesting. I have a book coming out of a book of drawings called the Blue Book. And in this class today, my friend told me that he has given to his students two notebooks stitched together. One is the blue book and the other is the yellow book. The blue book is the book of self, and the yellow book is the book of the other, where you write others people's words, while the blue book is where you write your own. And that was a nice thing, but I wrote it down so that I can remember it and use it. So I'm saying the importance of a book, of a notebook, is that nothing is lost. And the idea of carrying a sketchbook sometimes or always is also a good one. I wish I did it, but I don't because my main focus is on writing.
so, and this is a personal question because I actually used to carry a sketchbook in which I could write with a fountain pen as well as, those watercolor pens, not very
Same.
messy, so it just fits into a purse. Um, and sometimes when ideas came, it was almost competing. Would it be a painting or would it be words? And do you have that? And I don't know. I always wonder if this is even with people like Amit Chaudhary who are also musicians. When the ideas come, how do you translate it? Do they compete? I know in the end it all works well, but
Yeah,
how do you want to record it?
yeah. No, the idea of recording something as a painting comes as an idea for a painting. And the
Oh,
idea for
that's
recording
nice.
as writing comes to me only as writing. So I don't have any confusion in my mind.
That's
Uh,
lovely. I wish I
yes.
had that. It's, um,
I do, however, sometimes if I'm writing, the idea of painting comes sometimes as an interruption, sometimes as a release. I'm
Mhm.
aware sometimes that, oh, I'm taking time off from writing because the painting always seems very urgent. One thing I should also mention is that I don't work for days on a painting. That is, what talented painters working on
Yes,
canvases must do. I just do paintings that can be done in one sitting right there.
right.
It's just an exercise. The other day I was in conversation with Jhumpa Lahiri, and I asked her about this lovely essay she has at the end of her book, a non-fiction book called "In Other Words," where
Mhm.
she's describing uh, the process of learning Italian, and she describes in that book at the end how when Henri Matisse was going blind and was unable to paint, he started cutting out shapes, um, and of paper, and then he would stick that, and he produced art. The important part there is how someone who is very good at something makes
Mhm.
himself because of or herself vulnerable by trying something new.
That's also going back to when you're a toddler. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
When
maybe. So the idea of going back to being childlike and experimenting with what you felt was both new to you, but you were not inhibited about it. I think that's a wonderful
Yeah,
impulse. So for
fascinating.
me to paint is something where I'm trying to challenge myself into doing something and sharing something which I'm not good at. But it is a part of one's creative
Right,
expression.
right.
And I think that's important for all of us to do.
Um, and do you write 150 words every day?
I do. I
Or
do.
do you write more?
Sometimes I write more, yes, but I 150 is the rule for daily writing.
And that's only a novel in progress, or is it life and that's how, autofiction is just born?
Oh, yes, I understand what you're saying. Earlier, I used
It's
to do that.
journals.
Earlier, I used to write about anything and think that I had done my quota, but now I write only about the work, the book in progress.
Oh,
That's a way for me to stay focused and to make a certain kind of progress on a single project.
right. And I think we're almost running out of time. And we don't have questions, but we have comments, riveting discussion. Amitav G. It's about fact checking. One Sudeep Ghosh says 150 words is wonderful. I can tell this to my students. Your Every Day I Write the book is absolutely phenomenal, interesting and enriching show. But I also wanted to just touch upon publishing advice, if you have any for our writers, because you can be excellent at your craft, and but getting published is a whole different ballgame with marketing, market dynamics, whom and if there's anything you'd like to say to beginning writers on getting
Yeah,
published
okay.
internationally,
Well,
yeah,
there is a
go for it.
lot of explosion in publishing as far as I can see in India. Um, and all these festivals that we are having, including this one, I'm sure is a kind of a reflection of that particular eruption of literary talent. Uh, I think what people should do is that when you pick up a book, let's say this book, and you like it, which I'm hoping you do,
I do. I love it.
thank you very much. What you should do, for someone who is starting out, what you should do is look at on the copyright page and see where it has been published by. You should also check out the acknowledgements page and see who have been thanked, who is the editor. You should check out if there is any mention of how or where excerpts have been published, because and then you get in touch with those people, because the fact that you like a particular kind of book will mean that that editor is someone you are drawn to, and that publisher is someone you are drawn to. Don't try to serve what you are doing or offer what you're doing to someone who has inclinations or tastes that are very different from yours. I, for example, do not write those Harry Potter-esque tales of Hindu mythology, and therefore I'm not interested in sending it to, I don't know, whoever publishes, I don't know, that kind of writing. In India, I publish with Aleph. There are many other people. David Davidar is my editor, but there must be so many other editors. I have a book of drawing coming out from HarperCollins. They're interested in work that is breaking the mold in some ways, so it will be journals and painting. If you like or want to do that kind of work, approach that editor who is publishing me. That should be a focused approach. Write every day, walk every day, take care of yourself, and through practiced, focused approach, address those writers and those publishers whose tastes match yours.
Well, thank you so much, Amitava, for your time and those very wise parting words for all of
No,
our
no, no.
budding
It's an honor
writers.
for me. Thank you very much for your interest, and be well and work well. Okay, Meher is back.
Thank you.
And with that, we come to the end of this lovely session. I thank author Amitav Kumar for talking about your book, A Time Outside This Time. You read to us an excerpt from the book and spoke about good and bad writing, observation through painting, the role played by youth in protests, and so much more. So, thank you very much, author Amitav Kumar. And I also thank author Rituparna Chatterjee for making the conversation flow so smoothly and for asking questions, especially questions about fact and fiction, autofiction, intersection of art forms, norms, effective teaching on writing, and many more thought provoking questions. So, thank you very much, Rituparna Chatterjee and Amitav Kumar. And on behalf of Kalinga Literary Festival, I, Meher Gandhi, thank all of you who have joined us today for this lovely evening. And KLF is actively conducting such and more literary events. So make sure that you keep yourself updated and you follow the events and activities through our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. Thank you both and thank you all. Good night and
Thank
have a good
you.
day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.